Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. I am Lady Johaini Di Maampaw Banukag and I'm going to be continuing the discussion on data collection methods, specifically on interviews. Now, in Pakiti's book on experimental research methods in language learning, the author mentioned several qualitative research techniques. And among these are the stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews, as well as the individual and group interviews. So we're just going to focus on these two since our topic or my topic is specifically on interviews. Now, stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews are defined as retrospective techniques that allow researchers to examine learners' cognitive processes, thoughts, or feelings during task completion. Now, when we say retrospection, it means a post-event verbal report. And the focus of stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews is on language learners' cognitive activities or processes. Now, given the limited span of the human working memory, stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews should be carried out immediately after learners have completed language tasks or activities. So, itong technique na to, it's very useful if the researcher does not want to interrupt the learner's naturally occurring processes during task completion, which is very different from think aloud methods. Now in here, pwedeng magbigay ng stimuli yung researcher for the activities that the participants have just finished to help the participants remember or recall what happened and what they did. So pwedeng magtanong yung researcher kung bakit ganito yung ginawa mo, bakit ganito yung sinagot mo sa task na binigay ko sa'yo. So, the participants may be asked to explain their reasons for doing certain things. So, the best example I can give to you now is yung thesis ko, in my thesis, I used a written discourse completion task, and then in the written DCT or discourse completion task, I asked my participants to write down what they're going to say in certain situations where they are required to make an apology. And then after the written discourse completion task, I prepared an interview kung saan tinanong ko sila kung bakit ganun yung naging sagot nila sa different situations na binigay ko sa kanila. So that's the most I think that's the most personal na alam kong example of retrospective stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews. However, this specific technique has a key limitation because the participants might reconstruct their thoughts as they were not aware of what was going on due to the automaticity or unawareness of their thoughts. So, pwede yung mga sasabihin nila sa interviews or retrospective interviews mo or interview mo, pwedeng hindi yun yung talagang nangyari during task completion because they may just reflect their general tendency to do things in a certain manner. Now, stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews can be analyzed quantitatively through frequency counts based on data coding and statistical analysis. And they are useful for exemplifying cases or examples from learners about certain cognitive processes. Now next, we have the individual and group interviews. So from the name itself, no, magigets na natin kung ano talaga yung definition at differences ng individual and group interviews. So of course, individual interviews are one-on-one interactions between an interviewer or the researcher and the interviewee, whereas group interviews, as with a focus group, can be conducted with more interviewees at the same time. So for example, we have a group of 5 students, a group of 10 students, and more. Now, in the book, under the individual and group interviews, the author also mentioned about quantitative interviews and qualitative interviews. Now, quantitative interviews are those in which interview questions and responses have been prepared beforehand. So, from the definition itself, medyo similar talaga siya sa structured questionnaires, but in this case, it is carried out verbally. Now, in here, in a quantitative interview, it is more standardized, and the researchers' aim is to compare the answers obtained. In most cases, the responses are converted to numerical form for the purpose of quantitative analysis. Now, on the other hand, we also have the qualitative interviews. So, in here, it allows the researchers to explore research issues in depth. So, for example, you want to look at the attitudes, beliefs, opinions, and perceptions of the participants. So, the data is naturalistic because the responses are produced by the research participants themselves. So, yung qualitative interviews, they are usually audio recorded and transcribed for the analysis. And the researchers typically adopt purposive sampling through the use of specified criteria. And like, for example, psychological characteristics, the proficiency or achievement levels, gender, and the first language of the participants. Now, if you want to use interviews or interviewing as a data collection method in your study, you need to know that there are some issues in using this particular method. However, if you're okay with these issues, or if you have found solutions to these issues, then pwede mo namang gamitin yung interviews or interviewing as your method or data collection method in your study. So first, it has questions of access, confidentiality, and privacy, because interviewing or interviews is or are activities that deal with personal data. So, in here, there is a further ethical dimension that requires the researcher to take, or that requires us to take into account the role relationship of interviewer or interviewee. So, if we look at in the perspective of social psychology, meron kasing tinatawag na symmetrical and asymmetrical relationship. So, an example of symmetrical relationship is between peers. So, parang same kayo ng level. If you're the researcher and you're a student, or you're the interviewer and you're a student, you have a symmetrical relationship with the interviewee if student din siya. However, there is also the asymmetrical relationship. So, for example, you're a teacher and you're the interviewer, and then yung interviewee mo is yung student. So, hindi kayo same ng parang power, or hindi kayo same ng level. So, there's an issue on that. And in here, in an interview kasi, the interviewer will somehow invade the interviewee's private space. So, dito kasi magtatanong ka na ng iba't ibang bagay. Like, for example, yung kanina sa retrospective, stimulated recalls and retrospective interviews, mag-a-ask ka ng reasons kung bakit yun yung sagot niya sa mga tasks na binigay mo. So, it's invading the personal or the private space of the interviewee. That's why in an interview, there will be implications for the formulation of questions as well as for the content of your interview question. So, it will require a good deal of linguistic sensitivity and adaptability by the researcher. Kaya nga sa REC, yung research ethical clearance natin, tinitignan nila yung possible risks na mabibigay mo sa participants mo. So, if you're using an interview as a data collection method, then titignan nila if yung questions mo sa interviews um, poses risks to the participants or the interviewees. Next issue is that the best method to record interview data has been much debated. So, there are researchers who want to standardize or parang gusto nilang i-determine ano talaga yung pinaka-best way to record an interview data. But there are three main possibilities on how you can do so. First, pwede kang mag-write up after the interview. So, for example, habang nag-interview ka, wala ka talagang sinusulat. You're just conversing with the interviewee. And then, isusulat mo yung data ng mga narinig mo sa interviewee mo after na ng interview. So, of course, the obvious problem here is of memory. Kasi what if hindi mo nasulat lahat or hindi mo maalala lahat yung mga sinabi ng participant mo or yung interviewee mo. So, while there can be problems or there's an obvious problem of memory in right up after the interview, there are still researchers who favored this type of method in recording interview data. And then, of course, you can also audio record. This is the usual way na ginagawa ng mga researchers ngayon na gumagamit ng interviews. So, dati, a tape or cassette recorder. Ngayon, pwede na sa cellphone, di ba? So, we have recorders in our phone, so you can do audio recording. And then, while this is actually this is actually an easier way to record an interview data. Ang problem lang dito is yung transcribing, which is very time consuming. So, may problema pa rin yung ibang researchers when it comes to audio recording. And then, another possible way to record an interview data is through note-taking. So, while nagsasalita yung interviewee mo, you're also writing what they are saying, or pwedeng hindi lahat, of course, hindi mo naman yun mahahabol lahat, but you can just write the important points na narinig mo. So, ang pinaka-problem lang dito is, of course, yun nga, hindi mo kayang isulat lahat, hindi mo kayang habulin lahat ng sinasabi ng interviewee mo. And aside from that, pwedeng ma-distract yung attention ng interviewer kasi masyado siyang conscious kung ano yung susulat niya. And pwede din ma-distract yung interviewee kasi nakikita niya kung ano yung or parang conscious siya sa mga sinusulat ng interviewer. So, these are possible ways to record interview data. That's why many researchers are still debating on what is the best way to record interview data. So those are some of the issues in interviewing or using interviews as a data collection method. However, if there are issues or disadvantages, there are also advantages of interviewing or using interviews as a data collection method. So first, it allows researchers to investigate phenomena that are not directly observable, such as learners' self-reported perceptions or attitudes. And aside from that, since interviews are interactive, researchers can elicit additional data if additional answers are vague, incomplete, off-topic, or not specific enough. So, mas nai-expand pa niya yung data mo, or mas nakikita mo pa yung or ma-analyze mo pa ng yung data mo in a deeper sense. So that's why interviews are very good or one of the best ways to collect data in your research. Now, another advantage of interviews is that they can be used to elicit data from learners who are not comfortable in other modes. Because there are learners or there are interviewees or participants na mas comfortable sila sa speaking than writing. And when they are speaking, they are more likely to provide extended answers in your questions. So mas comfortable sila because it's in a conversational format. So, depending on the research question and the resources available, in an interview, pwede din naman na gumamit yung interviewee or interviewer ng ibang language, especially yung language ng interviewee. If that is something that will make the interviewee or the interviewee or the participant much comfortable in the data collection process. So if the interviews can be conducted in the learners or the participants' first language, it removes concerns about the proficiency of the learner, impacting the quality and quantity of the data provided. Now, lastly, if you're considering interviews or if you want to use interviewing as your data collection method, then here are some suggestions that you can take note or you can remember when doing the process. So first, we have be sensitive to and or match the interviewer's characteristics with the age, gender, and cultural background of the interviewee. So you need to take note of these things because it might affect the data that you're going to collect. Like for example, may terms ka na hindi masyadong gets ng mga Gen Z or Gen Alpha. So, pwedeng maka-affect yon sa data collection mo, di ba? And then, what if may sinali ka na questions na masyadong sensitive sa ibang culture or ibang culture, like for example ang participants mo are Ranao students, so there might be some things na hindi masyadong okay sa kanila na pag-usapan, so you need to be sensitive or considerate of these things. Next is to encourage open-ended discussion, like for example by keeping silent or by saying anything else rather than accepting a first answer as the interviewee's final and complete response to a question. So maybe because of pressure, of course if you are the interviewee, you might feel a bit conscious of what you're saying. So because of the pressure to answer the questions of the interviewer, they might forget some things in their answers. So if you like give way to or give them the sign na pwede pa silang mag-explain further or magdagdag sa answers nila, pwedeng mas maging maganda pa yung makuha mong data, 'di ba? So, instead of just accepting na like, okay, first question ito, then pag nakasagot na siya, diretso ka na sa second question. So, kailangan makiramdam ka rin sa interviewee mo if you think they still want to give more or give more answers. Next is to develop skills in anticipating and addressing communication problems. So, since in an interview, you are like conversing or communicating verbally with your interviewee, there will always be communication problems. Like for example, maingay sa lugar or pwedeng masyadong distracted siguro yung interviewee mo. Kailangan alam mo yung gagawin mo dito. And aside from that, there are times na yung isasagot ng participant mo or yung interviewee mo, hindi yun yung in-expect mo na sagot. Like for example, did you experience or when you experienced this situation, what did you do? And then ang sagot niya, ay hindi ko yan na-experience. So parang hindi mo na alam kung anong gagawin mo sa specific question na yon. So you need to make sure na meron kang plan B or ano yung pwede mong solution para i-address yung problem na yon. So you need to really develop skills in anticipating this or addressing these communication problems. Next is to try to make the interviewee as comfortable as possible. So you can do this by, for example, conducting the interview in a familiar place. So, of course, a familiar place to your interviewee, hindi sa'yo. Kasi siya naman talaga yung unang iisipin natin. And then, you can begin with a small talk to relax the interviewee, or you can also use the first language of the interviewee if a communication problem arises. So, for example, hindi niya na-gets yung term. So, make sure na alam mo kung ano yung translation niya sa language niya. For example, English yung questions mo and then may term siyang hindi na-gets. So, if Maranao siya, pwede mo siyang i-translate yung term na yon sa Maranao para mas maintindihan niya yung question. And then, you need to make small talks para hindi siya ma-pressure na parang masyadong strict or masyadong masyadong strict yung questions mo or yung interview mo. So, make sure na sobrang komportable niya para mabigay din niya sa'yo yung answers na talagang makaka-help din sa study mo. Next is to place the key questions in the middle of the interview because the interviewee may be nervous in the beginning and tired by the end. So, this is the reason why earlier I mentioned about small talks to relax the interviewee. Of course, you can actually not do this if the interviewee is like wala siya masyadong oras or nagmamadali siya. So, you can be direct in that case. But if okay naman yung setting nyo or hindi naman siya masyadong nagmamadali, hindi ka rin masyadong nagmamadali, pwede namang medyo parelaxin mo muna yung interviewee mo bago yung pinaka main questions talaga for your studies. And then of course, bago ka din naman mag-end sa interview mo, hindi pwedeng after the main questions okay, thank you, bye, ganon. Kailangan may mga small talks din sa huli para mas maging conversational yung interviews nyo at hindi siya para masyadong strict na interview na hindi siya pwedeng mag-express kung ano yung naiisip niya. So, last but not the least, mirror the interviewee's responses by repeating them neutrally to provide an opportunity for reflection and further input. So, after the interviewee gave their answers to your questions, you can repeat some important points. Hindi naman like yung buong sagot niya, yung buong sentence niya, uulitin mo. Pwede mo namang, parang unconsciously kunyari, ni-repeat mo lang. Because there are times na hindi masyadong parang absent-mindedly na nasabi yon ng interviewee mo and then pwedeng error yun sa side niya. So, pwedeng i-correct niya if nagkamali siya or pwedeng if you're going to repeat their responses neutrally, it somehow signals them to further explain that part maybe. So, you can really do this to make sure na you're giving them an opportunity to reflect on their responses. I guess that's it for my report. Thank you so much for listening and Assalamu alaikum.